The story of William Sampson is extraordinary. He was placed in solitary confinement and was tortured while waiting to be publicly beheaded, having been convicted of a preposterous crime in that nice old progressive Saudi Arabia. And he says that one of the things that kept him going is the cold fury that he feels about the way his case was treated by Canada's Department of Foreign Affairs and the lack of support from the minister of the day. Documents reveal that Sampson repeatedly told Canadian officials that he was being tortured only to have them dismissed as speculative. And in a recent blow, a new blow to his quest for justice and compensation for his horrific ideal, the highest court in Britain, the Law Lords, dismissed his attempt to sue his Saudi captors in England, where they have considerable resources. William Sampson.
There was a quotation that I will try and get right, and I'm also not sure of its attribution. It was said to be from Vladimir Lenin, although quite frankly I don't think the guy ever had the sense of humor to come up with this one. But he said that you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. The big problem is, as I was to find out in December the 17th, 2000, was it's one son of a bitch if you're one of the eggs. It really, really is. Because on the morning of December the 17th, I woke up, proceeded to go to work. I was living in Saudi Arabia, and the secret police, the Mahabeth, lifted me. And there started a cycle of 2 years, 7 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. I have that etched in my mind. I was counting them down throughout the entire imprisonment. Of solitary confinement, physical abuse, and rape. I came to know intimately what torture actually means and what individual acts constitute torture. And I would love to get into a debate on this point with the Attorney General of the United States, or for that matter, the Attorney General of this country or in Britain, because they all seem to want to slim that boundary down and define things like waterboarding as legitimate interrogation. Now, why was I arrested? I was picked up basically because a series of bombings had occurred in Saudi Arabia. And those bombings had injured a couple of British nationals and killed another one. And the Saudi Arabians, in their infinite wisdom, decided what they wanted to do was pin the bombings on some foreigners. As the bombings involved the deaths and injury to Westerners, they nailed a whole lot of Westerners, myself and some colleagues, people I knew that were living in Saudi Arabia who were part of the social scene I was involved in. And so we were lifted, and in my case, within a few minutes of my being arrested, I was being beaten and punched and kicked on the way to the police station. I arrived at the police station. I was handcuffed to a door, upright. And that's the way I've spent the rest of the time at that interrogation center for about 11 or so days. And except during the interrogation sessions when I'd be removed from the door, taken up to an interrogation room, beaten across the soles of the feet, the buttocks, sometimes hung up over a metal bar with the same treatment, beaten across the scrotum. And then around about day 9, somebody decided it was a good idea to rape me. And they did this twice, on the same day, and then the next day as well, as a repeat performance. By the end of this, I provided a false confession. I would have told them that I was Mahatma bloody Gandhi's reincarnation if they'd wanted me to. So they had what they wanted. They had me confessing to being a bomber. They had me confessing to being a British spy. I'm a dual national, British and Canadian, and they wanted, for whatever reason, to have me confess to being a British spy for purposes of leverage, I believe, on the British government. And as a means of also covering up for the fact that they have an internal dissident movement in Saudi Arabia, which in many respects certainly has a lot to dissent about. The Al Saud family has got to be one of the most corrupt and corrupting influences on the face of this earth. Their corruption not only permeates Saudi Arabian society, but the Al Saud family corrupt our own society. Our politicians, many of whom, when they retire, joined consultancies. Those consultancies do business with Saudi Arabia, incredibly large business with Saudi Arabia. Just to quote a few names, John Major, former British Prime Minister, works for the Carlyle Group, an investment group that has billions of Al Saud dollars in it. He's quite a wealthy man as a result of working for the Carlyle Group. And who are the other people behind the Carlyle Group? The Bush family. Even in Canada, the same thing goes on. So this pernicious influence of the Al Saud family isn't just in Saudi Arabia, and their legitimate dissent in Saudi Arabia occurs, but they don't want anyone to know about it, so they have to frame a group of foreigners. This went on for over 2 years. And during that time, the various governments involved, the Canadian was probably the most naive and probably the most stupid and the most culpable of all the governments involved, basically allowed us to rot. They made statements about what they did behind the scenes. They made various palliative gestures towards our families, tried to persuade our families, myself and the other 7 detainees, tried to persuade our families to shut their mouths, not protest, don't make waves, don't make it difficult, it'll only make things more difficult for your family members. Well, I'm here as living proof that if you don't make waves, your family member in such a situation is going to disappear. Because what I eventually faced would have been death by al-had, a form of execution in which your head is partially severed from your body and you are affixed to a cross and left to die. And it takes a few hours to die in that method. And I have no doubt that if it hadn't been for my family members, for the profile that my family and friends kept with the governments, the Saudi Arabians may well have done that to me. And I also know if they'd done that to me, they'd have done exactly what they're doing for Stefan Hashemi now. Not even thinking about pursuing justice for the death of Zara Kazmi, a Canadian journalist who was killed in Iran.